When Life Gives You Lemons is the podcast that speaks to high-performing individuals who have been through adversity but come back stronger. I'm your host, Emma Levy, a physiotherapist who has helped elite athletes on their way to Olympic success. This podcast was born following my own trauma when I was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of just 36. Sat in the chemo chair, I set myself the goal of starting a podcast to explore resilience and the importance of mindset. Today I'm welcoming Dan Murray-Serter to the podcast. Dan is a serial entrepreneur, co-founder of Heights, a brain care supplements company, and host of leading business podcast Secret Leaders. Dan attributes the start of his journey with Heights to his own history of mental illness, including insomnia and chronic anxiety, that was eventually cured after visiting a dietitian and being prescribed supplements, which to his surprise worked within 7 days. Dan, thank you for coming today.
Smooth intro. It usually takes me 2 or 3.
I mean, you've been interviewed, we were just discussing, you've been interviewed by some of the best, like Stephen Bartlett, Mo Gawdat. You've got a leading podcast yourself, so I'm not feeling intimidated at all.
You're looking very casual, don't worry.
But I am really looking forward to delving into your story. And when I wrote that introduction, everywhere I was kind of Googling your name, I found you described on a lot of sites as a serial entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, what does it mean to you to be an entrepreneur? What is a serial entrepreneur?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Serial killer is quite negative, and I don't obviously make anything for Kellogg's, so we'll just dispel those two attitudes towards it. There's like positives and negatives connotations. So when my dad ran a business, so he never called himself an entrepreneur, but he was a business owner, and he ran the same business from the age of 17 all the way up to 67. And, his main purpose was just provide for my family and have employees and look after them. And things were quite simple. Whereas I find my generation, and I'm guilty of it myself, you just get the kind of itchy feet. And you sort of stick your finger in multiple pies. And also, if you're trying to do something ambitious, the chances are it isn't going to work out. And so if and when it doesn't work out, you have a choice, which is, do I try again with something else? Or do I give up and go take a job somewhere? And people choose different paths. But for me, I feel like my favourite proverb is a Japanese one, which is fall 7, rise 8, which basically means fall down 7 times, get up 8 times. And this podcast is about resilience. That's totally my attitude. Like every time I get battering, I'm like, right, good lesson. I'm ready to go again. So serial entrepreneur means I've had 5 companies. 1 has failed, 1 has succeeded, 3 are currently running. Heights is the one that I spend all my time on. And the others have management teams, boards, different responsibilities in different businesses. But a serial entrepreneur technically means you've got itchy feet. You've got too many ideas, you've got no self-control, and you're unable to just stick at one thing and be happy with yourself. You've got to constantly keep going. So That's like a personality sign that I don't have the maturity to just do one thing and do it well.
I like that. But when we were growing up, I don't think as a child I used to hear of many entrepreneurs. I think you used to hear of people being like you said, like your dad running a business. Do you think there are more entrepreneurs now, or do you think we just now call it an entrepreneur rather than a businesswoman? Okay,
good question. An entrepreneur is a French word. And so, I think there's some implicit belief inside this word that what you're doing is ambitious and that maybe you'll do multiple of them. It's totally a wanky word. Like it is. For starters, it's French, and there is no other word for it in the English language, which I think is quite interesting. So, although there is an amazing George W. Bush quote, by the way, which is, the French have no word for entrepreneur, when he was trying to insult French people, and someone in the audience was like, it's a French word, George. Anyway, so either way, there are many more business owners and entrepreneurs today than there ever were before. That's a fact.
Why is that?
There's a few things, like there's innovation. So Britain as a country, the government, especially like the Conservative government, has massively invested in the private sector. Obviously, it depends which government, but ever since Margaret Thatcher and then, definitely the last 20 years, there's been a massive recognition, I think, that change takes time. Change in public policies and, the public sector, which can be really powerful, takes a lot of time. And I think there's been real recognition and appreciation for some of the things that have changed the world the most have been started by the private sector and private individuals. And just to reel off a couple of them, Google, which makes information free to everyone. Google, obviously, loads of negatives and all of the things, but let's just be really clear. Making information free to everyone will have done more to create free education and awareness and informed human beings in parts of the world we don't ever consider than any schooling program would or government education system could, because education has always had a barrier with cost. So making it free and accessible to everyone is an amazing innovation from the private sector. I'm massively into sustainability and and we're a B Corp at Heights, which means, the highest level of sustainability that you can get as a certification. Every initiative, every green policy, every single concept that's come out of Europe or America around how to make the world more sustainable has done less than Elon Musk has done with Tesla, who forced the world to move to electric cars faster than anyone else. And it's now the leading movement in automation, right? Yeah. So I bring up these examples because the governments, in the West start to recognize that actually the private sector can provide some pretty amazing opportunities if you enable people to hire, to build companies, if you make it attractive. And so over the last 10 years, especially in London, there have been tax schemes that have made it more attractive for investors to invest in entrepreneurs starting businesses. Yeah. So this is a very high tax country. A lot of places in Europe are very high tax, but England, Germany, France, they're amongst the highest places in the world that you can live for tax if you're in the middle class or upper class. Mm-hmm. And then if you're really rich, you don't pay tax at all, so we ignore those people. But most of the country in those spaces get squeezed, and there are tax advantages for investing in entrepreneurs, and that creates a cycle. Like initiatives like that from the government, they create a groundswell of people to be like, okay, I'll invest in this new idea, this new thing. And before you know it, 10 years on from that policy change, Britain now is the number 3, London specifically, the number 3 place in the world for billion-dollar companies.
Wow. Yeah,
so it's San Francisco, Israel, and London.
That's amazing.
And that's nuts. And that's from a standing start of zero.
Yeah.
So it just shows that actually these things are all connected. Like there is, the awareness that good can come from the private sector, but it only comes if you give people investment opportunities, and investors really, they like to know that they've got tax breaks and other good reasons to invest their money somewhere. All of these things are really important, but it's driven a massive rise therefore in media. So suddenly then, think about that. People are now writing about startups, and suddenly startups are interesting in the UK. Before they were only ever interesting in America, right? So now they're interesting in the UK. And so now people were like, that's a career I'd quite like to go into. When I left university, the only jobs in the world that I knew existed were like Accenture, Bain, McKinsey, all the guys, L'Oreal, these giant companies that go to those universities and tell you that's where you're going to work for the rest of your life. Or you're like, I'll be a lawyer or a doctor. You just don't know.
Yeah. At those career fairs, you don't see entrepreneur.
None of this. You just don't know, literally don't know. And so then if it starts to permeate the media and it sounds like an interesting job and it suits your personality, then I think you start to try that stuff. And so now we have so many people going into it. And of course, the failure rate is huge as well. But you have to also appreciate that you can't build a business without people. So what happens as well is you create loads more employment opportunities for people, and that boosts the economy. So this stuff, in theory, I believe, obviously, as you can tell, is really good for society, but it's taken a while to catch on. And I absolutely think that you've seen a lot more of it over the last 10 to 20 years for sure. Yeah,
so I think I've got quite an entrepreneurial spirit, and I often have these great ideas, but I never take them forward. And whether that's reduced confidence, lack of skills, I don't know. But I wanted to ask you, how did you start your entrepreneurial journey? How did you find the confidence to take that first step?
Yeah, well, before I answer that, let me just say I just did a podcast with a guy called Professor Scott Galloway. He's very, very interesting and smart business professor. And he said 2 things. He said, anyone that tells you to follow your passion is already rich and probably made their money in smelting and is trying to keep you poor. Because he said, don't follow your passion, follow your talent.
Ooh.
And if you have a talent, and if you have an inkling for your talent, if you follow that and develop mastery in that, you're more likely to find wealth and success anyway. And I think what's relevant to this is you actually have a talent. You've developed one, of course. Like, you know, to do what you do, you have to have a lot of skill, and it takes time and practice, right? So let's not take anything away from that. But you had an interest, which becomes very clearly a talent, which becomes real skill and mastery over time. And I think entrepreneurship is a lot more scattergun than that. So I feel like entrepreneurship, for me, certainly, and there are exceptions to this rule, but for me and a lot of the ones I know, massive generalists. Like, entrepreneurs are really not very good at one thing. And I can barely think of any. You know, you have ones, you know, I was an accountant, or I was I was a lawyer, or I was whatever you were. Like, I was a marketer. You know, I worked in advertising and I was a marketer before. And so you
had some skills. Yeah,
I had like 4 years, if you will, of professional experience before being like, screw it, I'm going to see what it's like myself. So that's quite common.
Did you have confidence in yourself?
No. And it's funny because I have imposter syndrome often and regularly. And my business partner, Joel, he made a brilliant joke years ago, which was always stuck with me, is he believes he's got imposter syndrome. So he just thinks he doesn't feel lack of confidence, and he doesn't understand anything other than he's just like very assured. He's very confident. And maybe because he was actually an accountant, so, you know, being sure on your numbers also helps, I think, being quite confident with stuff, which creates a good dynamic. But I can't relate to that at all. Like, I don't, you know, I exude confidence, and when people meet me, they think I'm very confident and all of those kind of things. But anyone who knows me well knows that I agonize about all sorts of things, and, you know, I'm classic high anxiety. I want people to like me. You know, so therefore I'm always assuming that people don't like me unless I put on a show of charisma and everything else. So I wouldn't say at all that I started from no confidence and pure fear as well.
See, that's so interesting. So how did you start your first company with no confidence and only fear?
The honest answer is Joel, who I've been friends with for my whole life pretty much, was massively into starting with me. So he was at PwC and he wanted to leave. And he wanted to start a company and do all of this kind of stuff. And I was doing really well in my career in advertising. So I was and I was like getting promoted. And it's very cushy advertising. Like, it's the best job ever. You know, people pay you silly money to dick around all day coming up with stupid ideas, and they tell you you're brilliant, and then they give you more money and tell you you're more brilliant. And then they give you like company cards to take people out and just get drunk. And it's a joke of an industry, but it's fantastic. So I was very happy. I didn't really want to leave. And then there was this whole like opportunity to start a company and do something different. And I really ummed and ahed for 3 months. But actually what happened is my dad passed away. And my dad was a business owner. And so this is the thing. My dad ran his business, like I said. Mm-hmm. Really bad health whilst I was growing up, and so lots of like problems with his. They had heart attacks and stress-induced stuff, and, you know, businesses like that, right? And so, in reality, I said to him, like, "There's no way I ever want to go into business," because I remember growing up, like, you know, we have money, we've got no money. We have money, we've got no money. We have to move. We kept having to move the whole time because, like, you know, somewhere smaller, somewhere nicer, somewhere smaller, somewhere nice. So after a while, you're just like, this entrepreneurship thing looks shit. Like, as a child growing up with it, and it's quite embarrassing with your friends, and, like, you know, you're a like shitty little teenager who's like, you know, believes that the world owes you something, and so you don't understand why your parents are ruining your life when actually they're trying to look after you. So I was massively turned off by it because it just affected my dad's health, and he was on a detrimental downward path throughout my whole life, basically.
You attributed that to his business?
Oh, totally. Like the stress, the responsibility. Like, he had bad health as well, and bad habits, don't get me wrong. And I've always been buoyed by that, like, to make sure I'm really into my health and well-being. And, you know, a lot of it was self-inflicted, some of it's genetic, and, you know, he was blind as well, and so some of it was sort of like physical limitations, couldn't just take himself to the gym or whatever. Yeah. So I was really anti it, and was like, absolutely never. And then that happened, and then I was sort of like, oh no.
How old were you when he died?
24.
Okay.
So I kind of felt like, I don't know, there was something weird that called to me, and I was like, well, you know what? And then the other thing is, you read a lot about this stuff and listen, I sort of listen to, other people, like read books and stuff. And it is easier the younger you are to take that brave step. And, people talk about it being brave, and then I think it's ridiculous because I've got friends in the army. So then I'm like, well, it's not brave. Please don't use that word on me. But I do remember vividly of all the things that, I've had to shut down a company. I've had to let go of everyone. I've had to let down all my investors. I've had to do all of the negative things you've had to do in entrepreneurship. I've had to do them all. And I still remember the scariest thing I ever did was quit my job.
Really?
Like,
when you were 24?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally. Because I graduated in the recession, so I was I didn't get a job for a year, so I was like bloody lucky when I did get one, and then it went well and all the rest of it. But in reality, it's a very, very scary thing to do, and I totally get it. And if you're not confident that it's what you want to do, and you're not really sure, and it's not your burning desire or passion, and more to the point, you've grown up telling yourself you'd never do it. It takes a lot. But there was just that inflection point, and I sort of understood that, my dad started when he was 18. So it's like, if I'm ever going to see if this is for me, I should do it young. Yeah. And I should just see. Actually, it turned out I really enjoyed it. Like, I really enjoy it. I'm quite a chaotic person, in the sense that, my wife is unbelievably detailed and organised and structured, and everything's on a spreadsheet and everything else. And I'm not. I'm perfect for advertising. I'll put it that way. So, creative ideas, and let's do that. And I'm a team motivator, and I love hiring people, and I love working with people, and I love developing them. And there's loads of downsides to my leadership style because of all of those things as well. But I'm very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
These things I learned actually are superpowers in entrepreneurship, because it does help. There are pros and cons, but it does help to have a positive mindset. If the Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. That is, that's not really how it works in entrepreneurship, because then there's also with reality. But you have to believe you can, otherwise you're not going to be able to make other people believe you can. And no entrepreneur's ever done anything impressive on their own. Like, it's all about building a team, and the team look to you to inspire them, to make them believe. And if your team don't believe, you are screwed. So that's one thing that I've always been pretty good at doing, is sort of like saying, I actually think there's an opportunity here. This is how it works. This is why we're going to win, and like, who's with me? And people really galvanize around that. So I kind of learned early in my journey that despite the sort of, private lack of confidence, those angles of my personality could be utilized to build teams, which is what you need.
So do you think you found some kind of strength from your dad's passing?
Yeah.
Or was it more that you felt a connection to your dad by going down that path?
Definitely the latter. Like, I definitely felt like this is what he wanted me to do. He did want me to do it, but I just didn't want to do it. I'm not sure he'd have approved of my, keeping on going or whatever, versus, they're very different businesses that I run compared to his.
Yeah.
But I do feel more sort of akin to him. Like, there's that classic, it's one of those things. I've got nothing to prove to my dad. He was an amazing dad, very loving, and always made me feel like I was enough. So there's no innate issues psychologically with it. Yet I'm still like, he'd be proud. Yeah. Which is ironic, because I always knew that he was proud, and was proud whatever I did. That was probably the problem, if anything.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, I feel like I'm lucky, because I had a friend who was encouraging me to do it. I had a life event that made me reflect. And I think also, change is a weird thing in life, because, that's a big career change.
Yeah.
People in careers like yourself, for example, there's a very clear path. In entrepreneurship, there isn't a path at all. Like, there just isn't. It's not, you're immediately at the top of a tree, you're the boss, but you literally don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so it's completely inorganic. It's like inverted. You should be at the bottom. You should be the intern, because you don't know anything at all at that point. And so there's a really good analogy that gets used, which is entrepreneurship is jumping out of a plane with a backpack, but you have to figure out how to build the parachute on the way down.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how it is. And the job is to really kind of either admit to everyone that you really don't have a fucking clue what you're doing, but you really appreciate everyone for sort of trusting you on the way, or to completely pretend that you do.
Yeah.
And I'm more the former. I'm just like, guys, I don't know what I'm doing, but we'll figure it out together. And I think either approach works, but you have to really own one of those personas.
Yeah.
And it has to be the authentic one. And I think people very often feel the first way and totally act the second. And I think that screams of inauthenticity. And I think those are the kind of bosses who really struggle with authority.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how life-changing moments, though, can make you reassess where you are. You know, so with me, when I had my cancer, and I just started a private physio practice, and then I realised that I just didn't want to go down that path anymore. Do you know what I mean? And that had always been my ambition forever. And I'm not saying I'm not going to do it at some point, but I massively pivoted, and I had a lot of objection from the people around me. But, you know, that's what you wanted to do. What are you doing? That's always been your dream. But actually, I'm a big fan of being able to pivot. You know what I mean? Being able to say, well, actually, maybe I don't want to do that at the moment. I want to do something else. I'm going to start a podcast, which was 100%. Totally different. And again, I was like you. I had no idea what I was doing. I still don't really, but I think I agree with you. You've got to be open and honest and say, well, hey guys, I'm learning.
It's really interesting because the people around you who love you will tell you not to do stuff for all the right reasons. But actually it's because they're scared. There's two sides of it that come out, but part of it is they're scared. They're genuinely concerned for you, and I'm not trying to suggest that they're not, because they have your best intentions at heart. But also it stirs up this personal admittance that, you know, they're not brave enough to do this, which is an uncomfortable truth to face. And I do think that psychologically, a lot of my friends, you know, from school and everything else, rather than other entrepreneurs, you know, and this is very common, didn't support me, you know, don't tell me, like, don't encourage me in any kind of way, don't buy my products, like, just none of it. And, you know, it's a very guy thing to do as well, you know, they put you down and make little jokes and stuff. But I've come to accept, you know, a lot of that is just to do with their shit, not my shit. And that's a very common thing, because at the end of the day, taking a big risk is a big risk. And most people don't take a big risk at any point in their career. The safety of what is current often does need a big moment to be like, wait, that's sort of woken me up. Let me reassess what's going on. Whilst things are sort of like smoothly going and everything's fine, people don't make those kind of big changes, those big decisions. And when you tell other people that you're doing them, they do think you're nuts. Yeah. Because they can't relate to it.
Yeah. And Grabble was a significant part of your journey, wasn't it? So you had one of the biggest, most successful shopping apps, is that right?
Yeah, it was the fastest growing shopping app in the UK.
Yeah, and then it failed.
So I've been on a real roller coaster with that one. But it was really exciting. I don't actually regret anything. I just... It was amazing learning, because there was just a period of time for 2.5-3 years where we were like the darling of the tech scene, and we were invited to we were given every award, we were written about in every paper. You know, I've got these amazing like Sunday Times features and Forbes features. Went to Buckingham Palace, won an award at Buckingham Palace, met the Queen, all sorts of amazing life experiences, right? Like, I fucking love the Queen. So that was literally, nothing could make my mum prouder than me meeting the Queen. Like, she's such a royalist. So that was really, really cool. And I got to take my mum to Buckingham Palace. And so those life experiences are awesome. They're obviously a little bit better if they end well, rather than like being the moments. But yeah, I think what I learned in the journey is you can't actually predict the outcome, but it's really important to enjoy it as it's going on. There's a really careful balance between enjoying the moment and appreciating, I suppose, the temporary nature of those moments, and not letting it go to your head. And that's quite hard. So if the first proper swing that you do is going really well, and you're raising millions, and things are, you know, the trajectory is quite a lot, and there's a recognition that it's intense as well, but you can let it go to your head. And there was definitely a period of time where I think we just felt like we were unstoppable. And actually a lot of that was false. Like, we had a really bad business model, and that was something we always knew. So we didn't make enough profit. And so our team was growing, and we had millions in revenue, but there was millions in cost. And so we had investors who were, this is a very common story, by the way, in tech. We had investors who just said, just keep growing, because we were growing so fast, and we'll just keep giving you money to get over that hurdle. Now, there's a zillion examples of this exactly going well. It's exactly what happened with Amazon. It's exactly what happened with like tons of these companies were propped up with investor money until you get to a certain size, and then you're a genius. But if you can't get over that hurdle, and you don't get to that side, and your investors stop, the whole thing implodes. And that's exactly what happened to us. So Brexit happened. the mood changed in the UK investment scene of like what people were interested in investing in and what they weren't interested in investing in, and we just went out of fashion in like a day, basically, from an investor point of view. And at the time we were like, oh, investors are dicks. But actually, you know, the mature lesson that I've absolutely believed and built around since is you kind of got to either play the game and know the rules of the game you're playing, in which case that one is a high risk, high reward game. The outcome of that is huge. Like if it works well, you're building $1 billion company, and if it doesn't work, you're going to zero. Most businesses are not that profile. Most businesses, you know, you talk about how many businesses or entrepreneurs, whatever. Most businesses are small businesses, not even in the startup sense. They're small lifestyle businesses, you know, where I run a service for you, I charge X, I know my cost. And most of those businesses don't go out of business because they understand quite a clear cycle. Like they'll struggle, but they can wind down their costs a bit, and it's not a case of like that or bust. There is a small section of startups where, you know, which I was existing in, where that was very much the case. And so the risk and reward profile was totally worth it. I take away nothing. I'm so glad that I tried one of those businesses. I'm so glad I tried it when I was young. You know, I was 27 building that business, and up until 32, and like no regrets. It was absolutely amazing. Yeah. It was really fun. And
you learned from it.
Learned so much from it. I got amazing friends from it. And actually, I really like the thing that I really grateful for is I learned the art of humility. Like I very quickly switched from like, I think probably being in a higher ego mode than I should have been and I'm proud of. I very quickly learned like a good humble lesson of that's what happens if you think you're like impenetrable and that you actually are fucking amazing entrepreneur and any of these things, right? I got a very humbling lesson. And I was very open and honest about it. I published lots of content about failing and about the journey of failing whilst I was failing. And it gravitated so many amazing people towards me, which I thought was really interesting. I always thought that people would be more impressed by me for doing well. Yeah. But actually by being really honest about how badly it was going and how difficult it was, some of the best entrepreneurs in the whole country, the people I revered, were all coming to me to talk to me about how touched they were about my experiences and how much they related to it and everything else. And that actually is, you know, how I ended up starting my podcast, because I was suddenly a magnet for the best entrepreneurs in the country, but ironically because I'd failed in a really honest way. And that wasn't tactical, but it was a really amazing life lesson to me, which is like, God damn it, if you're going to fail gracefully and fail honestly and share the lessons from it. And people don't, I think the reason why people gravitated towards me for it is people don't do that. It's amazing how starved people are of the actual truth. Yeah. Everyone is just like grin and bear it. Whereas I was like, no, this is terrible. This is how I feel about it. Yeah. And it made a big impact.
Was it the failure of that led to a downturn in your mental health eventually, which has taken you to heights, or was that a number of years later?
No, I mean, related, but not really reduced to that, to be honest. So I had bad mental health problems over the period of like 10, 15 years. So before starting my business, but, you know, different things. So I had bulimia when I was younger. I had anxiety and chronic anxiety. I had insomnia right towards the end of Grabble. Somewhat related, but actually turns out it wasn't entirely related because it was nutrition that made the big difference for me. So I went on a journey to like cure my mental health. I had depression for a while as well. So I was on antidepressants, which, you know, is a personal thing. Like when I talk about antidepressants, I'm always super conscious of different people's experience. So my priority when I was on antidepressants was to get off them. Yeah. I was like desperate to get off them because I really believe that they're a band-aid. And I've read a lot of books on mental health. Like you'd be very hard pressed to convince me that the net positive of SSRIs is better than the net negative. Like I'm virtually impossible to convince that that's true. I think the better thing is the root cause. Yeah. However, my mum has been on antidepressants ever since my dad died, and it's really helped her. So I'm not like, you know, I'm not pious either way. I just know that they work, but there are better ways to try and fix it. Yeah. And so they're like a plaster. They work today. Yeah. And they'll work tomorrow as well. They work as long as you keep taking them. But actually, sometimes if you've got depression or a mental health issue, there's a lot going on with you. You read any book on trauma, you read any book on nutrition and brain nutrition and all of these things, there's a lot of work to be done in the human body and the human psyche. It's just about, are you willing to do the work?
Yeah. And was your journey to cure your mental health related to what I've seen you describe as your spirituality?
Yeah. So definitely a big part. I mean, the depression, definitely a big part of it was to do with spirituality. So I never really got religion, if I'm honest. I was brought up Jewish, and I'm racially Jewish. But and so culturally I'm Jewish, I love the culture and I think it's a great culture and all of these things. Fucking nightmare at the moment, but other than that, I think it's a great culture. But religiously I'm pretty anti anyone's religion, to be honest, and mine included. But I understand the point of religion, and that's kind of the issue. The issue is, and this is why I think religion is so stupid, like everyone's arguing over the same bloody thing. Like actually everyone believes in spirituality. Like in theory, there are a set of rules that should be about how to be a good neighbor, good human being, good person in society, all this kind of stuff. And then everyone sort of just argues over what society, what neighbor, etc. And so it kind of loses its meaning. Whereas I've never understood that I never really got the spiritual side of religion. So anyone who's listening to this that's grown up reading, lots of Christian friends, Muslim friends, I feel like all that stuff, it's very offensive, but hey, I feel like all that stuff is indoctrination. You do that to kids, it's indoctrination. And it obviously works 9 times out of 10. But for me, I was like a repellent to it. I was like, the more you'd make me read it, the more I was like, this is fucking absurd. You guys know this is absurd, right? Like, this is obviously stories. And I used to get in so much trouble in school because everyone's just like, what are you talking about? This is history. I'm like, it's not what? Anyway, so I was already like a precocious, annoying little kid questioning everything. So
you never believed in God growing up?
No. Being honest, no. I never really asked myself that deep question too much until I was in my 20s. But when my dad died, I was like, it's suddenly very clear to me that I did not. And my dad did have faith, and my dad did pray, and he did believe all these things, but I just thought it was a fucking waste of time, and it turns out it was. So I felt vindicated. I was like, oh, thank God, there is no God. Knew it.
How did your dad's death make you realise that there was no God?
Well, from a very selfish point of view, right? My dad was a really wonderful person, like exceptionally charitable, everyone's favourite person, like was dying on the outside. Like I say, he was blind and had like so many things wrong with him, like health-wise, but he'd never complained ever. My whole life, he basically was just a bigger stoic. Yeah. You couldn't get him to complain about something. He was just light up a room, fun and amazing, and then would privately, suffer. And so he's a very inspiring person, and everyone that worked for him thought he was the best person ever. And so, he just didn't deserve all the stuff that happened to him, and he just took it. He just took it. And so I felt like that to me is just like, if there's a God, like that should happen to like Stalin or Hitler, or like, why does that happen to like nice people? So it was a very selfish point of view, right? Because it's like, obviously, if you believe in God, it's a lot more than just about the individual. It's about the greater good and all this stuff. But I found it very hard to connect to a sense of spirituality. Like the person that was the most spiritually connected to me was the person in the most amount of pain. Like, go figure. And I knew lots of dickheads growing up, my parents' friends and stuff, who were just like bad people, and they're perfect health. And they'll scam people and do all sorts of horrible things and cheat on their wives and their husbands and all this stuff, and more amazing stuff would come to them. So I'm like, where's this crap? Karma seems like nonsense to me. So all of it, I was just so allergic to all of it. But then my best friend, I was having dinner with my best friend in a group of us, and someone mentioned this thing called ayahuasca, and I was like, I have no idea what that is. I've never heard of it. And I definitely, like everyone who hears it for the first time, definitely couldn't pronounce it. And my best friend was like, I think you need to do this. And I was like, it sounds terrifying. I don't want to do that. And anyway, we had like an argument for a while, and he was like, you've been so not you for a whole year at this point, and you're kind of pissing off all your friends. And he was, he's my best friend, so he was like really honest. He was like, just pissing off everyone, and you're not you. You're just a downer, and you're always a downer at the moment, and you don't want to go out, and I have to fucking nag you to go out, and like, you're just terrible company, and you never were, and it's just you've got to do something. You can't want to be like this for like ever. I was like, of course I don't. I'm on antidepressants and stuff. And he's like, so, you want to like surely find anything. Why aren't you more open-minded trying anything? And I was like, all right, you know what? This is a very good argument. I get over myself. I'll go with you. And yeah, it was exceptionally powerful.
Did you go to like Peru, or did you do it in the UK?
No, there were shamans who had been trained in Peru, lived in California and Hawaii. And Hawaii is another place where it all grows as well. And so they would take the plant from Hawaii, and then they would come to Europe every year.
Is it legal here?
But I can't remember the exact rules, because basically they are priests. Like it's a holy thing.
Yeah.
And so there is a license you get as a priest, as a practitioner. I know it's exempt in some countries. I don't know about the UK. I know in America, as long as you have the license and it's all done like officially, it is.
Yeah. You basically purge your system, don't you?
Yeah, this is not recretional stuff, just to be clear. Like, you would never do this on your own, ever. And you just have the worst time. Recreational, I feel like the word recreational is loaded with fun. Like, you're kind of having recreational fun.
Yeah.
This is not fun at all. But it's deeply powerful. And so, yeah, it's just the most powerful psychedelic in the world. Wow. And so you take it, and in a setting, so there were 15 people in like a sort of circular room, and shamans in the middle who were basically making you feel comfortable and asking what your intention is. And I'm like, what the fuck is an intention? I don't know. Want to not be depressed anymore? Be nice, to be honest, as a start. And you have all these sort of strangers around you, and you basically feel like you're in a cult, right? I mean, I'm from London, this is not normal to me. And so I was like, God, this is so woo-woo and ridiculous, but whatever. And they're unbelievable. It's very common as well that they're amazing musicians. And so one of them is the most ridiculous, incredible singer ever, but they both play tons of music, as lots of different instruments. And so you're kind of basically like having a concert whilst doing this psychedelic, and you do it at night. This is all very common stuff, by the way. You do it at night, and you do it over 2 nights. So one night when it's dark, lasts 6 or 7 hours, and then you sort of go to sleep, wake up the next day being like, oh, that was kind of weird. And then the second night is usually the powerful one. Right. So usually the first night you do it, it's like a little entry into it, but you can't go deep enough because you're so disconnected from. It's essentially trying to take you away from reality, and your ego is desperately clinging on to reality in the first night. So you're rationalizing everything and clinging on for dear life, and so you very rarely go that deep. And so they told us all this in advance. And then the second night, it's a little liquid that you drink, basically. It's like a shot of green juice, literally. It's a tree sap. It's a completely natural occurring tree sap. And so the second night, I did it, and I had this complete epiphany of pure spirituality, which was quite amazing. I just had this, endless vision of being connected to basically the trees, the plants. Very weirdly took a journey into the Amazon jungle and saw that the precipitation, this is very niche, but the precipitation that happens in the Amazon jungle basically becomes a river in the sky, and essentially replenishes like the deserts and goes around the world and does all of this amazing connected stuff. I later found that that's completely true, by the way. That is literally a natural occurring phenomenon that I'd never heard of. I didn't even check afterwards. I was watching a science show, and they were talking about this Amazon rainforest river in the sky. It's a thing, look it up. And I was like, what? That's what my vision was like years ago. I just thought that was like a wacky thing. So I had like this totally connected to nature, things I didn't know were things. Went through like an entire like reincarnation as like a flower, basically. And
you wake up remembering all this.
Yeah, I remember all of my visions exceptionally powerfully. But the thing that you wake up with is, my experience was unbelievably profound sense of connectivity to everything, which I'd never had before. And, there's a thing in depression, really depression is there's lots of different formats of depression, but really you feel lonely. Ultimately, you just feel like no one understands you, which is a spiral in itself. And it's a really tricky one because when your friends are trying to help you, or your parents or anyone, like it becomes annoying. Yeah. Because you know that they can't, but you know that they care, and it's annoying for them and it's annoying for you, and you get annoyed with each other, which makes you more lonely and it makes them more in despair, and it's just an unbelievable catch-22. And this was like a complete 180 into I'd never felt so connected to my humanity ever. And I was like, God, this is what spirituality is. And some people are totally born like that, right? Some people, like my wife actually like is spiritual. Like I explain all this to her, and for her it's like, yeah, I feel connected to people. Like she feels aura when someone moves into a room and all this kind of stuff. Whereas I'm always like, I need to take powerful psychedelics to feel that. But, you know, so I think for me, that experience was unbelievable breakthrough, and sort of like the Neo Matrix, red pill, blue pill. Like once you've gone there, there's no going back. So like ever since that one time, like I've never come close to depression since. I've had other mental health issues like insomnia and other things, but you know, I've never had anything even resembling depression ever since I went off my antidepressants. Like, well, you have to come off them before you do ayahuasca anyway, which was tough. You have to not be on medication, so you have to come off it like 2-3 weeks before anyway, which is very difficult. So I was already in quite a bad place at that point, but I never went back.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've always story. And it's just like, you know, not been happy ever since, because, you know, happiness is habit. You got to work on being happy every day. It doesn't just you don't just have a moment in your life. You know, get married and then you're just happy with your partner every day. Like they're going to leave a fucking dirty fork out one day and you're going to lose your shit. So it's a daily practice. But it was a very powerful ability to feel connected. And again, I think connection is totally the cure to loneliness.
Well, I had a happiness expert on the podcast who talks about the most important aspect of happiness is connection.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, we're social creatures. It's interesting because I have become in the last couple of years obsessed with solitude. And so I go on this thing called Unplugged. There are these cabins all around the country. You can go on your own basically, and you put your phone in a box and no one can contact you. It gives you a little Nokia 3210 so you can contact your wife or partner or like kid, whatever you need, just to be like, this is the emergency contact. But otherwise, my phone's off. You do 3 days in a cabin and you've got books and you've got radio, but you're in nature. You know, and
but it's 3 days and you know you're going to come home at the end of that. Right, so this is the point.
That's chosen solitude, and that's not loneliness. But I think it's unbelievably fascinating in a world of connection. So literally being online all the time, contactable all the time, notifications, Twitter, Instagram, blah, 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 blah. You're overloaded with connection. And so the cure that actually helps your mental health is chosen solitude. Flip side, in reality, the problem is most people don't actually have lots of good friends and don't have any meaningful connections. And so the problem there is loneliness. And I find that such a fascinating paradox between the two things. They're almost identical in reality, and yet they provide the exact antithesis of each other on the mental health spectrum. Well,
I'm not sure that social media connection is the same as face-to-face connection. Not. You know, the conversations you're having online, it's...
Yes, they're toxic and and surface level at best.
Right, tell us about heights.
You've got to jump to the end.
Let's go to heights.
So, I had insomnia. And I would say that's the worst thing that I've ever had.
What did that look like for you?
So it's a good question, because it wasn't that I didn't sleep ever. I just one day woke up at 2 a.m. and was like, okay, that's weird. I'm like wide awake though, full of energy. So it's like, okay, I'm just going to go and work, because like I'm tossing and turning for like half an hour, and this is pointless. I'm so awake. And I went and worked that night, and then the next night it happened again. I was like, that's weird, and it just kept happening. And so I'd go to sleep at like midnight, could not go to sleep before midnight, but I'd wake up at 2. And no matter what time I went to sleep, it was 2. And it always happened. And so after a week, you know, first week, obviously I thought I'm going to be a genius because I heard that Elon Musk doesn't sleep, right? So I'm like, he sleeps 2 hours a night. This is my sign. This is my inflection point. I'm about to become a genius billionaire. I'm going to solve the next climate crisis or whatever. No. I just started to feel terrible, of course, as you would. And so, you know, I went to the doctor. The doctor gave me sleeping pills. It felt reminiscent of the antidepressant things. So I kept them. I thanked him, but I didn't take them. I went to see, you know, a therapist. I went to see cognitive behavioral therapists. I went to see sleep experts. I got to know a whole bunch of sleep experts. I tried a bunch of protocols. Nothing really worked. It went on for months and months and months. 5.5 months later, I was at dinner with a friend. She's like, it sounds like you've got a brain health problem. I was like, I'm not a 90-year-old man. Like, why would I have a brain health problem? It's just like, you've described all the interventions that you've tried, nothing's worked. Those are all to do with your psychology and your mental health. But if they're not working, maybe it's something to do with your physical brain. And I was like, okay, that's actually quite a good point. She's like, have you been to see a dietitian? I was like, no. I mean, why the hell would I? Like, it's my brain. She's like, okay, just go see one. So I went to see a dietitian. It was a really interesting experience, but she basically immediately said, take these supplements, which I was like, I'm a white British male. Like, I'm pretty allergic to the idea that supplements could work. I hear everywhere that they don't work anyway, so why would you say that they do? And she was like groaning with exhaustion because it was like, fucking media. Like, you know, it's not that they don't work, it's that most are shit. So you've got to take good ones. So what you need, and so she made it very clear. She's like, look, you've just told me all the things you've already done. So we can rule those out because they haven't worked for you. So there's not a lot left other than nutrition. So let's try these, which I thought was very fair. So she recommended omega-3s, B vitamin complex, and blueberry extract. And she said, omega-3s, most of your brain is made of omega-3. B vitamins, you're talking about insomnia. You've got, energy spikes are all wrong, right? So we need to regulate your energy. And blueberry extract is a powerful antioxidant, and that's going to clean out your lymphatic system, which meant like a car wash for my brain, is how she described it. So, all right, whatever. So she sent me along to Planet Organic, which I thought was ridiculous, because I was like, why can't I just go to Boots or Holland & Barrett? And she's like, you know that whole supplements don't work thing? It's actually more to do with price. So the cheaper supplements are not the deal you're getting, the less you're getting. And so what she explained, which I think is a fundamental area that sort of sparked that curiosity for me, in this space, there's a big difference between the marketing label, so the marketing claim that you can make, which is always based on the minimum amount of vitamins that are approved for a marketing claim of that particular product, vitamin C, vitamin D, whatever it might be. And that's a big difference often to the scientific dosage of what makes, or what's called efficacious, right? And the gap is huge in some of these, like huge. But no one making the best product in the world can make any different claim to the person making the worst product in the world. And that's basically the problem with the supplement industry. This is what she explained to me. So she's like, when you go to Planet Organic, you will balk at the prices. However, you'll actually be paying the exact same amount, pretty much pound for pound, of vitamins that you'd be paying in Boots or Holland & Barrett or any like high street place. But there you're going to get 4 or 5 times the amount. And that's going to be the scientific dose. And I need you to take the dose.
How were they allowed to do that?
Well, it's an industry-wide thing. It's like some bizarre collusion.
It's very weird.
It's very weird. It's just like... And the thing is, they're legally allowed to do it because if you turn around the pack, if you're informed, which no one is, it's all there in plain sight. That's kind of the thing. But like, even, you know, in supplements, they make it overly confusing on purpose. So in probiotics, they call it CFUs. That's the measure. That means colony-forming units, which basically means live bacteria. Mm-hmm. In vitamin D, they use IUD. In general, they use NRV, and everyone knows RDA.
Yeah.
None of this stuff, like, how much of an expert does you, like, Joe Public need to be on this stuff? I just want to get my bloody vitamins, and for them to be the right dosage. Just really reasonable request.
And they've also got loads of rubbish in them, don't they?
Loads.
Like, awful stuff.
That's also, like, a function of this stuff. So to fill most vitamins, so there's a few exceptions, like magnesium is an exception, protein's a good example of an exception. You know, those are both bulky, right? So you want to take enough protein. Anyone that's ever taken a scoop of protein knows I couldn't sell you a capsule and be like, you're fine. You'd be like, what? No, impossible. And same with magnesium, you need at least 2 capsules. It's a voluminous thing. However, almost all the other vitamins are microscopic in the right in the scientific dosages. So, you know, to fill up a multivitamin, you're talking about a 1/10, sometimes a 1/5 of a capsule size. So they've got to fill up the rest. And that's bulking powders and caking agents and stuff that's... I mean, I just read Ultra Processed People, so I'm like particularly right now into like how much junk is everywhere. Yeah, so
I've tried giving those multivitamins to my kids and they always get tummy aches. And it's because then you look at the ingredient. I mean, I now look at the ingredients beforehand, but it's because all the other stuff is in it. And, you know, they're marketing it to kids with pictures of Peppa Pig.
I know, it's really challenging. I mean, I'm very anti this stuff, so don't get me started on kids. But gummies are particularly complicated because the number one problem, I mean, there's some stats, I won't get into it, but there's some stats around the amount of hospital visits and anaesthetics that are given to kids purely for their teeth because of sugar being consumed in their diet. And it's like the number one cause of anaesthetics or something in kids is from the bloody dentist from sugar in modern day Britain. Wow. Yeah, that was from Ultra Processed People. I only learned that last week and I was like, what? My mind is blown. So gummies is a really fascinating thing, because gummies, like basically kids, as you know, are very fussy. So you want them to take the vitamins. This is the complicated part as a parent. You want your kids to take vitamins. It's good for them. But gummies are bad for them. So like it's really complicated, because they probably won't take the thing that's good for them. And so you have to kind of make this trade-off, like, is it good or is it bad? And I don't have an opinion at the moment, right? All I know is that we couldn't make gummies as a company, because that would be like against our ethics. Yeah. On a personal level, I always feel bad for parents about this, because I now have a toddler, right? So I know that you're dealing with an actual psychopath. Like, how do you get an actual psychopath to do what you want? I mean, generally make it tasty, or you're getting a hit in the face. Yeah. So I get it. So look, when it came to height, she sent me to Planet Organic. I spent £120 on 3 supplements, which I thought was bonkers, but I did what she told me to do, and it worked. Like, I actually slept for the first time ever. It took a couple of days, but I slept. And I was like, I can't believe this works. And I went back to her and I said that, and she was like, I can believe this works, because it makes total sense. According to the science, it makes total sense. You know, you basically got an imbalance of nutrition in your brain, and it's causing you to have, she described it in a really smart way. She said, you know, your house is on fire. And when your house is on fire, you need an alarm, otherwise you might sleep through and not know. And the alarm that you got was insomnia. So your mental health has suddenly flared up, and it's going to carry on flaring up until you find the solution. And she's like, that's very commonly how a dietitian thinks about their work. And she said, which was amazing, she said, you know, most people with mental health problems won't go to a dietitian or nutritionist ever, right? They'll never think nutrition, and they definitely won't think supplements. It's just not a normal, I guess, line of thinking, almost. However, she's like, you know, almost 50% of the work that we do as dietitians and nutritionists relates to your mental health, your cognitive performance, your mental performance, your energy levels, your awareness. Just think about, you know, nutrition, generally your food, everything. It's also related, you know, so they think about it a lot. So she wasn't surprised at all, but your general consumer doesn't ever think about it. And so her frustration at the time, which I thought was really interesting, she was like, you know, your doctor should have sent you to all the places they did, and me. Of course. Like, why not and a nutritionist and a dietitian? You know, I'm glad that he didn't, because I was able to eliminate, if that makes sense. Yeah. You know, I probably would have done the supplements and then been like, oh, it was probably the therapy. So at least this way I was like very clear. But it is crazy that it's the last place people go. And I think that's a real shame, because, you know, my business partner, for example, had really bad gut health issues. The first place you go is a nutritionist or dietitian. It's obvious. Yeah. You have a bad stomach or whatever. It's really obvious. You don't ever go see a doctor who's not going to tell you to go see a gastroenterologist or a dietitian. It's the first place. But for me, this was the last place. So I think that needs to change.
But also, that was a number of years ago, wasn't it? Yeah. Whereas, because if someone comes to me now as a physio and they've got any kind of issues, holistically, I will always kind of suggest diet,
I think
nutrition.
It's got a lot better.
Yeah, I think it has as well.
I think awareness has really improved on this stuff.
Absolutely. And that's thanks to companies like Heights, to be honest.
Yes, but the problem still persists in society now on misinformation. And not just misinformation, but like, it's very hard as a modern day consumer to like really know who to listen to and what to trust. It's really difficult. Like, I feel bad for myself. I feel bad for everyone, you know, because you do hear people, again, it's a soundbite to say supplements don't work. That's a soundbite. And it goes off from people who are quite respected, who aren't in the nutrition space themselves necessarily, but they are professors and scientists with big platforms, and they'll say those things, but they'll actually then caveat the smaller thing of like, well, most don't. And the truth is, most don't, because of the choices of, you know, the price, which is a shame, which leaves a small sect of high quality ones that do. However, as we know, everyone at the moment loves speaking and slogans and sound bites to get a point across any which way, and that's one that confuses people. And I think we're living in a time now where, you're right, if you do your research and you are really committed to trying to understand how to be healthy, supplements do tend to actually come into the space. Like, at the end of the day, most of us have nutritional gaps. I tell the Planet Organic story. One of our longest serving customers is the founder of Planet Organic. Really? She has 5 subscriptions of both of our products, of her husband, her 3 kids. We don't sell in Planet Organic, and she has any supplement she wants for free, but she takes ours, which is, I think, and she has given me permission to admit this, is why I've checked that I'm not trying to like tank their share price. But, you know, she says the reason is because, and Planet Organic, obviously, their job is to get high quality organic food. The soil quality in the UK and just in Europe is so poor that it's hard to get the nutrients that you need from your food, which is mental, but reality. And so I hear people talk about this kind of stuff, and it is a shame. Obviously, you can't get the nutrients you need from your food in a modern day diet. Is pretty damning evaluation of it. But my view on this stuff is like, if you want to be generally as healthy as you can, there's sort of like be how I was, which is the cynical know-it-all who's like, I don't need any of this, I'm pretty perfect with my diet anyway, and then have the problems that I did. Or there's like the open-minded approach of like, actually, you know what, I'd rather give myself the best possible chance I can to be as healthy as I possibly can. And I think more and more people are taking that approach now. And they're taking a real interest in nutrition, which is great. But people out there making things more complicated, that doesn't help.
Yeah. And you've managed to get some amazing celebrity endorsements, haven't you? How did you actually manage that?
I mean, a lot of it is luck. So the most famous and best one ever, which is our longer serving customer number one, was Stephen Fry. And so that's really lucky because one of our investors was the founder of WeTransfer. And WeTransfer had worked with Stephen Fry, and so he said, the founder's like, I can send it to Stephen if you want, and we can see what happens. And I was like, that'd be amazing. I love him. And the day before we launched, he basically sent me an email. I was like, this is incredible. Yeah. And long story short, we had a passcode on our website. You couldn't buy it until we were launching the next day. And he sent me this thing being like, I've had such an incredible experience. I felt perkier in the mind and all of this kind of stuff, like lots of amazing quotes. Can I buy them? And I was like, we don't launch till tomorrow, but I can give you a passcode so you could buy them if you let me use your review just now, like your quote on the website. And he was like, well, okay, that seems pretty reasonable. And he's been a legend ever since. So
really?
The day we launched the probiotic, he was the first customer. He's never missed a day of either product. So he's our longer serving customer and our like best customer ever, actually. Yeah. And, every so often we'll have people that represent him get in touch and be like, you can't use this, you haven't paid X, Y, and Z, blah, 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 blah. And I forward it to him because he basically said, whenever that happens, just forward it to me. And I forward it to him, and every time, about half an hour later, someone comes back going, okay, sorry. It's amazing. So he's just like...
That is brilliant.
Yeah, he's so nice. And we get really lucky. Like, we're trying to do stuff with, UK Sports Institute and athletes at the moment. And I've learned enough in my approach now to know how to make the approach right as well, which is that the only people ever worth getting endorsement from are the ones where it's completely authentic. So we've got the product now over time to a whole bunch of people. Yes, we had Stephen Bartlett, and we have Vogue Williams and all of these people who people love and are celebrities. I mean, a lot of them I don't know about them until I'm told by my team or whatever, because I don't massively follow media, if I'm honest. But I'm always like, oh, that's cool. And the way that I would say it is, if 10 people, let's say 10 celebrities were sent our product, I'd say the usual expectation here is that 5 don't open it. And it just sits in like everyone gets send a lot of free stuff. So 5 don't open it, 5 do, and of the 5 that do, 2 or 3 become evangelists, right? It actually has a big health impact on them, and they want to help. And so they get in touch and they start doing stories and start doing organic stuff, and you can see where that's authentic. Yeah. And so when I want to go into the sports space is exactly the same, which is I want people to try it. Yeah. It probably can't or have a massive impact on everyone. That's not reality. But the people that it does do that for will become actual advocates, and they're people we can work with. Yeah,
it's really exciting. We do have to bring it to an end.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's so interesting. I could talk to you for a lot longer. I do like to ask my guests one final question.
Yes.
If you could go back in time to when things were at their worst, at their lowest, what do you wish you could have told yourself?
Ayahuasca's great. Hurry up and do that. No, that I probably should say something more.
If it's legal.
Yeah, I should say something more responsible, shouldn't I? Was my legal response. I think when they were at their worst, do you know what has actually been really helpful for me? After my company failed, someone recommended, this is a very classic response, but someone recommended that I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And at the time I was like, that's the most triggering response, like, tell me to go read a Stoic book. And I was like, you're just trying to piss me off. But I did it, and I was like, God damn, this is actually really quite good. And so learning more about a Stoic philosophy of all the philosophies, like that one really resonates and has been very, very helpful, because you're always going to be faced with problems. And the only thing you're ever going to be able to control is obviously how you adapt to them and how you emotionally deal with it. Find a philosophy or find something that works for you, but one where you're going to be able to be in control of making the best of a situation and know that that is a truth, a guarantee, even when you're at your lowest moment. So for me, that was Stoicism, but for others, that'll be other philosophies. But it's just sort of, keep hope that you can find something that will work for you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I also like the Stoic philosophy. I've not read that book though, so I might,
Really?
but I might go and get that one later on my Kindle. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I think that your story does demonstrate multiple examples of resilience and bouncing back, which is what this podcast is about. I haven't tried heights, but after today and after kind of researching you, I'm definitely going to try heights. So I urge anyone listening to go and check it out.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.